Hello and welcome to our fourth in our series of Loveland Opera Theatre VLOGs. Today I am very excited to be a part of a panel where I hope I will learn a ton, and I hope that you will learn with me as we have some great voices joining us who are going to help us as we take on a very challenging but important topic, the topic of diversity in the art form of opera. You know, as we have watched the many different struggles of people who are minorities in our country and the different ways that they have spoken out in the last many years, but especially in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a number of really vocal groups who have helped us to learn more about how we can be more inclusive. The world of opera has started having this conversation more seriously as well. And so we as Loveland Opera, along with our colleagues in many other companies, have started to have this conversation within our companies and with our artists about how we can do a better job of being more inclusive in the way that we produce opera, in the way that we invite artists to be a part of opera, and in the way of how we foster new opera in the future. So I'd like to welcome the three people who are my guests who are joining us today. First, we have Victoria Baumgart. Victoria is a tenor ensemble member with the Loveland Opera Theatre Ensemble and has performed with us many times. Victoria is a tenor. That's already an interesting thing about you, Victoria, because we don't have lots of female tenors, and it's something that people sometimes maybe actually struggle with as a diversity issue. And so it's something that we've been grateful to have you in our tenor section in the ensemble. Victoria has a deliciously low, very distinctive and sultry voice, and she comes from a long lineage of singers and actors in her family. She started out her love for singing at West High School in Iowa City, Iowa. There she sang for 2 years in the school choir, only leaving it to play volleyball, basketball, and to run track. We love those opera singers that are also athletes. In 2014, Victoria was cast in her first musical, Kismet, with the Loveland Opera Theatre, and she has also performed since then in our productions of The Merry Widow and Amal and the Night Visitors. She is currently singing bass in a Sweet Adeline's barbershop quartet called Lyric and is enjoying that genre of music, and she has a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from the University of Notre Dame and a Master in Business Administration from the University of Iowa. She's married to Tom Baumgart and has 2 teenage boys, Matthew and Michael. Michael is a budding triple threat as a singer, dancer, and actor. So you've brought up somebody who is a lover of art as well, Victoria. So Victoria, here's my question for you. So you are involved both in the Sweet Adelines and in opera. These are both groups that definitely have a history of being created more by a white dominant community. So what are your experiences in being involved in these art forms as a person of color?
Well, Tim, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful vlog. It's a very important topic, especially nowadays. I have, it's wonderful to be in both of these types of genres. And actually, the barbershop actually has African American roots in it. I don't know how many people know that. And so that is very near and dear to me. Um, and it's you use your voices differently, and I get to use my low voice for bass and still kind of in the range of tenor for the Loveland Opera Theatre, and that is wonderful for me. Um, it's great for the Sweet Adelines. I actually sit on the Diversity and Equity Inclusion Council for there, and and so it's great to see the different approaches from both groups. And like, for example, one thing that the Sweet Adelines is doing is we're doing a song assessment tool to see, what's the lyrics, are these songs appropriate for performance and on stage. So it's both are wonderful groups.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Victoria. Our next guest is Dr. Charles Moore. Dr. Charles is a has been declared a skyscraping tenor in a review by the Arkansan music critic Eric Harrison. He hails from Kingston, Jamaica, and had his early music beginnings in the boys' choir of the St. Richard's Catholic School under the baton of internationally renowned conductor and musician Lloyd Hall. While maintaining an active national and international performance schedule, Dr. Moore received his Bachelor of Music degree in vocal performance from the University of Mississippi and his Master of Music and Doctor of Musical Arts degree in performance and pedagogy from Louisiana State University. His area of focus in his terminal degree was the works of H. Leslie Adams. Theater appearances include Ferrando and Così fan tutte, The Prince in Rusalka, Vuval in William Grant Still's Troubled Island, Pat in David T. Little's Dog Days, Pirelli in Sweeney Todd, Benedict in Beatrice and Benedict, Ruggiero in La Rondine, Camille in The Merry Widow, Mac the Knife in Die Dreigroschenoper, and Fenton in The Merry Wives of Windsor. The concert performances also include appearances with the Greeley Philharmonic Orchestra, Don Ottavio with Mozart's Don Giovanni, with the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra, Handel's Messiah with the Longmont Philharmonic Orchestra and Jefferson Chamber Orchestra, and excerpts from Eliza with the Diocesan Festival Choir and Orchestra in Jamaica. Dr. Moore has also done much work in the preservation and dissemination of folklore and music forms within the Caribbean. This includes his membership with the Jamaica Folk Singers, as well as participating in research which led to the declaration of the Maroons of Jamaica at a UNESCO Masterpiece of the Oral and Intangible Heritage. This has fueled his interest in presenting the music of minority composers and featuring their works in his recitals. These composers include Robert Owens, Noel G. Dexter, H. Leslie Adams, Harry Burleigh, Jacqueline Hairston, and Ned Rorem, to name a few. His pedagogic interests include vocal pathologies and injuries, as well as the paths to recovery for the singer and performer. He currently serves as instructor of voice at the University of Northern Colorado and is an active founding member of Opera SOS at LSU, a program designed to provide meaningful experiential opportunities for budding professional singers. It's always fun to listen to your bio read, isn't it, Charles?
It definitely is.
So, Charles, my question is, you're coming from both the world of professional opera, but also training young singers in university setting. What are your experiences and thoughts about how university training in opera is affecting the kind of diversity and the way we're looking at diversity in the opera field right now?
That's a good question, Tim. Again, thank you for having me today. One of the things I think that we have been doing as a university and as higher ed is that we have been finally recognizing some of the obstacles that singers are facing, and more so with the teachers, the individual teachers that are teaching voice. I think there are institutions that I've been to that have recognized that sometimes the ground isn't level for all singers and for all performers, that we don't start at the same place, we don't develop in the same way. And I think we, especially where I'm teaching, we're recognizing and we're acknowledging that not everyone starts on the same ground, and we need to be aware that there are challenges for each person depending on their background, and we have to acknowledge that. And we have to also provide ways of mitigating that. So I will say that the work has been more active, certainly more active than when I did my studies, but we still have a long way to go.
Definitely. But it's great to hear that that's happening in training, because that's definitely a lot of how our young singers have their formation in their understanding of the art form. So I'm glad that the conversation's being had. And then finally, Margaret Ozaki Graves enjoys mentoring in the arts through her endeavors as a cultural consultant, arts administrator, teaching artist, and professional performer. She's a proponent of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in the arts, in life, and particularly in opera. Ozaki Graves has contributed cultural and performance work to the efforts of Japanese Arts Network during the 2020 pandemic and ongoing civil unrest, pivoting to create a variety of online, virtual, hybrid, and self-guided experiences, including the Colorado Stop AAPI Hate rally in March 2021. Kintsugi, The Art of Healing, Finding Beauty and Repair for Denver Arts and Venues, a forthcoming multimedia zine featuring Japanese and Japanese American artists called Amplify, and Zoto, a supernatural immersive adventure. In addition to featuring artworks of and inspired by the Japanese art of golden repair, Kintsugi sought to tell stories of resiliency, provide art participants with opportunity for self-care, and address existing stigma surrounding mental health issues within and around Asian communities through the hashtag I Am Not Broken campaign. Zoto took participants on a self-guided audio tour through Denver's historic neighborhoods of Sakura Square, Five Points, and Cap Hill to experience some spooky moments while learning about site-specific historic acts of terror fueled by redlining, segregation, resettlement, and KKK violence. Ozaki Graves was among a cohort of Central City Opera administrators who devised and created Opera Central, a video podcast dedicated to framing opera within contemporary issues and the world at large. In July, she hosted their inaugural episode, a conversation with baritone Will Liverman. In August, she collaborated with JANE and Group Project to create and produce a visual album called Love for Loveland Opera Theater's virtual programming, one of our recitals that we have offered and is still available on our YouTube page. This performance fused her artistic activities in opera and musical theater with those in Japanese traditional music and lifted up the artistry of BIPOC musicians, dancers, producers, visual artists, and filmmakers. Some recent efforts prior to the pandemic include performing in Breaking Glass Arts' 2020 Drag Diva Gala, inside the orchestra's 2020 Music of the World Tour, a 2019 all-female identifying production of Don Giovanni called Giovanna's, as well as acting as cultural consultant for Cleo Parker Robinson's 2019 Granny Dances to a Holiday Drum and Central City Opera's 2019 production of Madame Butterfly. Her writing has been published in the Nats Journal of Singing, Nikkei Today, and publications for Japanese American Resource Center of Colorado and the Allied Arts. She holds a Diversity and Inclusion Certificate from Cornell University. She has taught on topics of culture and diversity casting for Ithaca College Voice Intensive and the UW Milwaukee Nats chapter. She holds degrees from Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music and Lawrence University, including a doctorate in vocal performance studies and opera with a cognate in Japanese aesthetics and music. It's a long bio, but an important one to tell us how much work you've already done in this area, Meg, and I'm sure as you continue to do that work, you see there's so much more to be done. So my question for you is you've obviously as an artist incorporated this work into your art. Why did you do that? When did you start doing that? And what kind of are what spurred you into making this a part of your art form?
Well, thank you for that big, serious bio and question. Thanks so much for making this discussion happen, Tim and Loveland Opera Theater. And thank you to Charles and Victoria for participating as well. The reason that I'm familiar hopefully with some of you out there as a performer for Loveland Opera Theater. I have been so lucky to perform with Loveland for a long time. And Loveland was actually one of the first places where I was able to connect these two disparate performer selves that I had up until that point, which was, being an operatic and classical singer, and then being raised as a traditional Japanese folk musician. So I've performed a lot of traditional pieces for Loveland, but one thing that they asked me to do early on was to participate in a winter holiday concert celebrating different cultures around the world. So it was for a holiday soiree, and it incorporated not only Christian Christmas traditional pieces, but also some South African music, And I brought in some Japanese music where I was able to sing and play on the koto, which is one of 3 instruments that I play. It's a long 6-foot harp-like instrument that's traditionally played on the floor. So I guess if you're asking how I feel like I've made a little bit of a turn in what I'm doing as a performer and as someone working in the opera art form. And I guess that could be the first moment there. And then over time, and particularly over this year of 2020, it gave me a lot of space to consider how I can be my full self on stage and off. And a part of that for me is combining these 2 different performance worlds. So I was also really fortunate that Loveland Opera allowed me to create the I Love concert as part of their series. And it was really fun to be able to curate something towards diversity and to share some of my musical experiences that are outside of the operatic field.
Meg, as we look at that performance, probably in my opinion, at least just from a viewer, the most really meaningful piece in it, not that the rest of the concert wasn't beautiful, but was the piece that you did that was talking about the internment camps that happened here in Colorado. As we are looking at our history, as we are coming to terms in America with some of the things that we have done that we don't love about our history, that's definitely one of those kind of scars on our history that that you have direct connection to because of your family. Will you talk a little bit about what that process was to kind of combine an opera aria and trying to tell that story?
Yeah, definitely. So what I love about opera is that it is so deep and you can bring what you want to it. And my sisters and I decided that we had a lot to share and say on behalf of my grandparents and my father's experience as internment camp survivors. It was very interesting. My father became interested in knowing his roots after he retired. And part of that process was a process of self-education in where he came from. And part of that journey was the years that he spent as a child incarcerated in a Department of Justice camp, actually in Texas. But as you mentioned, Tim, another one of these Japanese American incarceration sites was in southeastern Colorado, called Amachi, in a little town called Grenada. So my sisters and I saw that my dad gave a few lectures on this, and we were wondering, is there a way that we can bring this story to people, first of all, in a shortened format, second of all, maybe without the platforms that those sorts of lectures would require, and thirdly, find an audience to tell this story to who may not otherwise be aware of it or may not know that they would be interested in knowing it. So for me as an opera singer, bringing some opera to the story, and for my sisters being filmmakers and film editors, bringing that into the storytelling, we were able to create the video Let Me Weep, which if you are a Handel fan, you might know an aria called Lascia ch'io pianga, and we kind of purposed that aria, which then I wrote an arrangement for koto. And the selection process of the music was due to the meaning of the text and the feeling of that music, and also because the instrumentation of that Handel aria incorporates colors that are similar, I think, to the color of the koto. So yeah, it was a grand experiment. We wanted to be able to tell our story, but for me, it was important not to have to be the voice of the story, because essentially it's my family's story, but it's not my own. And using the operatic aria and using film as a way of storytelling, it let the story tell itself. So I hopefully that my intention with that was to make it more easy for people to take this story in, because it is not an easy story for me to tell, and it may not be an easy story for people to hear.
Well, I thank you for doing that. It was very moving to me, and I know a lot. We got comments from a lot of other people who watched it of the same thing, and that is still available if you'd like to watch it on our YouTube page. Victoria, I'm going to come to you for just a minute. You know, we have definitely been surrounded by these conversations between the Me Too movement, between the George Floyd, what happened directly after his death, and then of course the trial has just happened, but are going to continue to happen. There's a lot of conversation happening. So why is this conversation important for the arts and for opera to also bring into our worlds?
It's a great question, Tim. And when you think about what's happened, with George Floyd and such, it's all around systemic issues. And systemic issues are not discriminative to just the justice system. It goes across the board in every single thing we do in our life, performing arts as well. And that's why it's important to understand what are the historical roots that have contributed to systemic discrimination for whatever ism you're talking about, and diversity as it relates to performing arts and opera in itself. And so that's why it's important, and that's why it's relative to this discussion and to the opera world. And I think about my son, who you mentioned, who is a dancer, and he's working very hard in the dance world to talk about the cultural appropriation and stuff that's happening with that. And so it's a pertinent and real and relevant and timely conversation to have. There are stuff, and you'll probably unpack that in this session here, about what are those obstacles along the way that's just been in place since the dawn of time, right? That we have to undo and unravel.
Definitely. Charles, as we look at the art form of opera, I mean, of course, we know the history of opera. It started, for the most part, in Europe. Definitely dominated in the creators and producers as white men. But at the same time, they were telling stories of all kinds of different cultures. Oftentimes because there was some sort of kind of attraction or exoticism in the area of Europe that this story was being written. What are the challenges that we face in this art form just because of its history and where it's come from as we try to have this conversation of diversity?
Well, I think one of the things, it's something that interestingly I was discussing with my students quite recently. Whenever that happens, and opera is such a beautiful art form. I mean, I will say that I came to opera later, and this is not something I intended to do with my life, but I always said I was going to be a conductor and then the opera bug bit me, and here I am. But back to your question, I think one of the things that does happen is that there is history that it was formulated through kind of a double lens. So it's someone looking at another culture and getting their perception of it. So we have had that happen in the development of opera overall. And what's happened is that the people who are often being talked about aren't involved in the creation of the story. They aren't involved in telling the story. We have an impression of what the culture and the outside culture is like, but we don't often know what the truth is. We have an interesting and a really great opportunity now to actually retell those stories and involve people who those cultures were based on. And I mean, we know that the operas that tell of other cultures are some of the most beautiful operas because it does create a merger of music. And I won't say that it's not beautiful, but we do have an opportunity now to involve and to research those stories and to bring a layer of truth that was not there before. And it also comes from the point that, okay, well, we know where opera came from, but we know what's happening now, and that it doesn't belong to just one place anymore. We know the birthplace of opera, but we have different artists. We have artists that look like me. We have artists that look like Meg. We have artists that look like Victoria. And we get to bring what our perception, our kind of view of what's going on to this art form is. So I think, yes, there is that problem, but we do have this opportunity now to involve other diverse viewpoints, per se, and bring our voices to tell and retell these stories.
Meg, as we look at some of the problematic repertoire, we definitely see a lot of conversation happening around the operas that surround Asian cultures. We see definitely a lot of conversation right now happening around Madame Butterfly, both in how it's cast, but also how it is portrayed. And of course, a lot of the history of especially these pieces in America and Europe were that these Asian characters were being played by white singers oftentimes in their original inception, and even still in some cases today. We definitely, we faced maybe not as much during the production, but even after the production, our production of The Mikado, which is, this interesting production written by English gentlemen who are trying to comment on English culture, but utilizing this lens of an Asian town to tell it in. And then we also have this challenge and this history of how Otello was played by a white person very often in blackface up until 2015 at the Met, one of the largest houses in the United States. So, how do we reckon with some of these things? How do we hold conversations around them? How do we do better at producing these pieces in a way where we are recognizing the need for a larger conversation?
That's a big question.
And other people can jump in too. I just wanted to start it.
So first, to talk about the problematic works that involve Asian characters or Asian culture or the appropriation of such. Honestly, in light of what happened in March with the Atlanta murders, I have to reconsider how potentially dangerous stereotypes can be. So all of us here, we're opera fans, and we already have a deeper knowledge of these works and traditions than the outside world who are not opera fans has. So, Butterfly, for example, there have been a lot of more recent reframings and and different approaches to telling the story that I think have been an improvement upon what is problematic in the work, but there is something essentially problematic in the fact that it is a piece conceived by and based upon a play conceived by and based upon the travel journals conceived by white men who, in their stereotyping of Asian women, created a trope that has persisted in our culture, and as of March of this year, and certainly before that, has become dangerous in some ways. So I think that's where I'm kind of at with the Asian works right now. But you know, I'm in a tender space as an individual on that right now.
Understandably so.
Yeah. Then, yeah, as far as what you were saying about, you know, the tradition of yellow face and blackface in our operatic art form, I mean, that still persists today. And honestly, there was a big debate about this, I believe in 2019, a production of Aida at the Colosseum in Rome, because there are so many traditions wrapped up in our art form, right? And for some communities and companies, that is a part of the tradition. I think hopefully we can say in America that, you know, we're ready to move beyond elements of our art form that are offensive to artists and audience and potential artists and potential audience involved, and at the worst can be dangerous to some people. So, and I think, you know, as I think diversity is increasing and improving, particularly in my time, there have, you know, between the time I started singing and now, we now have established professional transgender singers. So because of that increase in diversity in that area, we now need to make adjustments to make spaces safe and inclusive for transgender singers. And I have been really happy to see some of those adjustments happening. So I think that, you know, in whatever diversity we're welcoming in, then the next step is to ask, how do we make this more diverse space safe and inclusive for all of those taking part, whether it's on stage, behind the scenes, or out in the audience.
Charles, as we're having this conversation about casting in these difficult roles, but just kind of in casting in general, one of the things that we're very aware of is that it's not an excuse, it's just a reality in opera that you can't just cast any voice in any role, that roles are written for specific types of voices, and so you have to find someone not only that looks like the part, but also that sounds that they can sing that, and it creates a challenge. How do we find the balance in making sure that we have the right singers and the right voices in the parts, and also make sure that we're honoring the cultures that we're representing?
That is, I will say, that is the challenge. Tim, you're really asking the questions today. They are really challenging, and they're never easy answers. But I will say that there are some companies who are trying to better open the door for singers. So sometimes you have to understand that. Sometimes the singer doesn't come in the perfect package. The singer who is most appropriate doesn't always may have challenges. So your singer who fits the part the most, who looks the part, who has the right voice and is ready to sing the role might not always have the diction you want. Um, does that mean that you turn away the singer and sacrifice everything else? I mean, I can't say, I don't own an opera company, and I know it must be a really difficult decision, but I would say that sometimes it takes understanding that there are big challenges that face each singer, and sometimes for the singer that might fit a particular role. Um, Also, sometimes it goes with looking at our perceptions. I've often been told that I don't often look like a lead role. I was told that for a long time, just because I didn't fit the traditional wavy haired kind of look. And I mean, I know that other singers have been told this as well, but, and I've had to work against that. I've had to work showing that I can play these roles. I've had to do that in order to prove myself. And I'm sure that sometimes other singers face this, that sometimes you have to find someone who looks the role, but you have to understand that there can be different looks for the role. It doesn't have to be one specific look that you have. So it comes with broadening our perceptions of what a role can look like, what a role can sound like, and also helping our singers to get ready. So if you find that singer who fits the look of the role and who fits the sound of the role, even if you don't cast them, say, give them some feedback. Hey, I really think you fit this, but perhaps you could do this to help your diction, and to do it in a way that helps. I found that often um, in higher ed, I think that sometimes our students get a little bit shielded because we are sometimes kinder to them than when they step out into the world and they don't get that kindness. But I actually think it's possible to have that kindness to say, hey, I think you sound great. I think you look great for this role, but hey, your diction's not up to scratch. It's not where you could be right now. Why don't you take a look at that? Why don't you get some hard feedback on that and get looked at that? So I think it's possible. I think it does take broadening our perspectives and not limiting what we're looking at, but understanding that the world is our oyster. And that's just me not owning an opera company.
No, I mean this is important, and the reality is they're hard questions because nobody has an easy answer for them, and that's why we have to keep asking them and talking to them and hearing people's voices about them, and knowing that just because you're a person of color doesn't mean that the next person of color is going to agree with you on the solution either. That there's diversity in the solutions to the issues as well. Meg, I want to come back to you for just one more second. So one of the major things is, should we do a Madame Butterfly if we can't cast an Asian person in it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of opportunities for reframing the story. I think Charles had mentioned that before, that we can tell these stories in new and different ways. So I would encourage, a production that didn't involve people of Asian descent cast in it, to consider reframing the story so that the appearance of a white woman performing as a Japanese woman is not a part of the problem there, right? Because that's essentially going to be offensive to somebody, right? It's going to, because of that stereotype aspect that I was talking about, to somebody out there, that is caricature at the best, and something more offensive and worse at the worst. So I would say, find a way to tell the story so that it's not making fun of a group of people. And because it is basically the story of told from the perspective of white creators, then perhaps it could be reframed into that space.
Sure. So Victoria, one of the things with understanding casting that's been mentioned here and that we continue to need to have a conversation about is we can say we need to cast with a specific type of person or a specific culture in specific roles, but if those people don't feel comfortable to come and audition, if they don't feel comfortable to even experience opera, then we're never going to be able to open up those roles to the people who we want that look like the role that it's originally intended for. So talk to me about how we as art companies, how we as opera companies, how do we make our art accessible? How do we make it a welcoming environment for people to come and audition? I mean, I have literally heard in Colorado, well, we would have cast this show with more people of color, but nobody showed up for the auditions. But it's not because people of color don't live in the state. So how do we get those people to feel welcome to show up on our doorsteps and to come and see our shows?
I think if we went to, so who are the people of influence of those who would come to audition? So let's take, the younger, anyone, like the kids, your voice teacher, your chorale teacher, someone who is influential to the more diverse population. If I am, my doctor or whoever I go to, if they're saying, have you heard of opera? Have you heard of Loveland Opera Theatre? You have a great voice. I see you singing this other genre, and exposing them early, and the people who are trusted advisors to kids who, or just anyone who has, that potential to audition, create that awareness. And I think that's a lot of, the other thing also is perhaps look at what other barriers are there. Are there, oh, I have to to take voice lessons. Oh, I don't have the money to take that. I mean, it's a pretty privileged activity to be able to have a coach, to be able to know how to audition, to have voice lessons. That for any lower economic group, that's a difficulty. It happens to be exacerbated with the at-risk community. And so I think there's ways that we can reach, it's outreach really, creating the awareness, creating the barriers to be able to audition. I think that will help create the pool, and just, I guess, the awareness.
Meg, you've done a lot of work in outreach with a number of arts groups. I read in your bio. What has been your experience? What's successful as we're reaching out to different cultural groups and to different minority groups? How can we not just look like we're going, opera's something that's really good, you need this, but how do we make it something where they feel like they are welcome, that their voices are heard, they're going to see people like themselves on the stage? How do we do a better job of that?
Yeah, I think that it's great that we're at the point now that we're asking how to do a better job at it. I think that there was a period of time where opera was reaching out to people, well, not really reaching out, but saying, hey, we're great. I know that you would love to come see us here. And I think removing that assumption is super important. I think those of us in opera doing the work to connect what is relevant in what we do with what the particular interests and talents of possible young artists who could move into opera, or reaching out into communities, not to say, hey, opera is great and we know you'll love it if you come see it, but to say, hey, what is it that you need, and how can we help achieve that? I think this last year, we've been able to experiment with that in ways that we never thought possible before. With some opera companies donating their costume shops to making masks for community members in the early pandemic. For me, it has been with my own community, being the Japanese American community, it's been working to see how I can use my artistry to tell stories that are hard to tell or are impossible to tell without the help of music. I come from a community that is very adverse to speaking up and speaking out, adverse to expressing emotion, and my art form has the ability to do some of those things. So, maybe I think broadening our idea of how opera can reach out to communities is a great thing. Maybe these communities are not going to be diehard opera fans and opera goers, but maybe we can use opera and music as a therapeutic approach to help them express the emotions that they're not able to do so otherwise.
Charles, do you have some examples, one or two, from other programs you've seen, other opera companies, other theater companies, other art companies, where they've successfully made a group of people feel welcome that would not have maybe originally felt welcome to that art form before? Can you think of some ideas of things that you've seen that have really worked and been effective?
Actually, yes. Just to also say before I do that, that I do agree with Meg and Victoria talking about asking the community of what they want. And I think that's why some of these companies have been successful. One of them that I'm thinking of is Minnesota Opera. They have a workshop that is done every summer, and I got the chance to actually sit into one of their workshops for the young people there. And one of the operas they were working on, one of the things they were working on was kind of an opera on the Hmong people there. And it was an opera written for them. And I was just fascinated with how they had integrated into the community and told the story of these people. And they invited the lady who wrote the book there. I don't remember her name just because I haven't looked at it in about a year. But it was fascinating to see her interact with the people there, how they taught the music, how they reached out to the community, and they were doing this all online. I was kind of just blown away by how effective it was. Minnesota Opera for me ranks there. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think this vlog series has been really, really effective. And I think Tim, this conversation is something that I've seen a lot of opera companies trying to have, and I am glad that you and Loveland Opera have decided to do this. Because if we at least talk about the problem and we talk about things that we sometimes don't understand, because I've learned a lot from this conversation, just being with my colleagues here. If we don't talk about it, we don't know what's going on. We don't understand the issues. And we all have our different privileges in different ways that prevents us from understanding what the other person is saying. So I think Loveland Opera, I think Minnesota Opera, I think even with my opinions, I think the Med hiring a diversity person has been also a really big step in moving forward. And I think we need, as companies, as opera companies, and as stakeholders, we all need to take bold steps to integrating, because it's not just one world anymore. It belongs to all of us, and we're going to have to just admit that that's where we are, and we have to make everyone feel comfortable in this form.
Definitely. Victoria, as we're talking about both making the environment in our rehearsal spaces and auditions welcoming, but also we want people to feel welcome when they walk into one of our productions, whether it's at the Rialto or in a different space, or whether it's an online production. What are some things that Loveland Opera specifically, but also just all art presenters can do to help make our audience spaces and the ability to access art more welcoming to a diverse audience?
Well, let's see. It's a great question. How do we make, the question is, how do we make like when you walk in, the audience
Well,
feel
and just not
welcome
even if
and just,
whether that's about purchasing a ticket or coming
yeah,
into the theater or
yeah.
joining an
I
online
Yeah,
performance.
look at the entire I want to say customer because I'm in business, but the attendee uh experience, from buying the ticket all the way to the, coming and greeting. In fact, as we were preparing for this vlog, we were saying, okay, I made the comment of, well, can we make sure for ADA compliance, can we have closed caption to make sure that the folks that have ability challenges can hear and see. And so what are we doing, from the entire experience, from buying the ticket to coming to the show, being greeted, getting your ticket, being seated? What's the diverse composition of the entire staff, that experience, on whether it's online or in person, so that you just have that whole um, realm to think about. I think also reaching out to, so then when I come to the production and you have a complete homogenous audience, that's a little bit intimidating, perhaps. So what is it that we can do? Again, more community outreach to make sure that um, it's accessible to get tickets if they're expensive. I loved what Hamilton did, Lin-Manuel, and they made sure that they reserved tickets for those who otherwise couldn't have gone to the show. How do we make the audience more diverse so that I feel welcomed when I come, and I'm sitting, and then, just go from the front door to the stage and just look at every single step of the way. What are we doing in every realm of diversity and inclusion and equity to make it feel right? And then you then end up getting to the production stage and everything we've been talking about, casting and what's the actual number, and it all then comes together holistically. So if you just look at the whole experience and dissect that and figure out what do we need to do better there, I think that would make the entire experience enjoyable.
That's helpful. Meg, one of the things that's important is that we've talked about the challenges of the current repertoire of opera. So new work and encouraging artists to create uh, um, maybe even out of the box kind of work, so that we don't have to have an opera that has an opera and a libretto, or a composer and librettist, and kind of the traditional things. Thinking outside of the box and how we use it as an art form to create art and also encourage diversity. What are some of your thoughts? I mean, you obviously, we asked you to do a recital. We didn't say what it had to be. We let you kind of decide how you wanted to present your voice in that recital, and you took it and really created this beautiful message that definitely was entrenched in your background, your history, your culture, your family. How do we continue to encourage artists to do this kind of work? How do we encourage new works to be created that will showcase people that maybe just don't feel that in the current old repertoire of opera that they're seen?
Well, I think 2020 and that space that gave artists the time to breathe and reflect. I'm certainly not the only person who's done this. There have been artists at every level in our industry who have had great success in self-produced works. I think it would be a wonderful idea if the institutions of our field would engage more of these artists in the development and production of these new works, because they have more to offer than just their voices on stage singing the traditional repertoire. I think also too, when artists are given the license and space to create on their own. For me, for example, in this work, Loveland Opera gave me the autonomy to do whatever, you basically said, do whatever you want. So then I didn't have to have any fear or anxiety about, talking within my own team and saying, we want to make this 90% like inclusive. So either the piece needs to be, needs to incorporate traditional Japanese instruments or needs to engage BIPOC artists, producers, and creators in the making of the video. So and it's easier to do that in a space that is safe to do so in.
Great. Well, I mean, and I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but I'm just so pleased that you did feel comfortable to create a work like that, because I can't tell you how meaningful it was to watch, and our audience just responded to it. And so I think it just screams how important it is. And then I think sometimes for opera companies and just arts companies in general, we're afraid of what the response may be. And every time we've done it, we always get such a great positive response. So it's, it's proven that it is so important, but it's also people want to hear your voice, and that authenticity of your performance is really what resounded, because you were yourself and you represented things that you knew and what was important to you. And I think that was really what made it important. Charles, as we're training artists, you're in a university setting, how do we, Meg definitely had to break out of a bit of an opera singer's set, what an opera singer is, what we have as a set idea, maybe in a traditional sense, to do things like this, to kind of figure out how do we encourage new artists and young artists to be willing to take these risks and to have their voices and that authenticity heard by others.
Well, it is hard. I think when our students come in, I mean, the good thing is that we get normally art students who normally who know that they don't fit in and they're comfortable with that. And for me, I was one of those students. I did not necessarily fit into, oh, I'm an athlete, or oh, I'm this, but I was me. The thing is that we don't want to discourage their creativity. We don't want to, whenever they bring works to us that are different, that we don't understand, we need to go research them. And that's been a lot of my thing. Like, some of my students will bring Chinese works to me, they'll bring Japanese works, they'll bring Arabic works, and I'm like, I don't know this, but give me a date. Let me go figure this out. And I have to go look it up. I won't be an expert. And I say, hey, you're going to be the expert in the room for this, because I'm not at this point, and that's okay. I'm the expert right now at teaching you how to sing this, but I am not the expert of this repertoire. So that's one thing I've been encouraging my students to go find things that you relate to, because they have their identities. And we should not squash this by the idea of repertoire that's standard. That's also the other thing. I have kind of thrown out the standard repertoire thing. Yes, I know we have to sing in different languages, but you know what? we have to sing other things too that are related to us. So I assign composers who are BIPOC, I assign composers who do different languages that my students are interested in. One of my students is from Hawaii, and he talks about music written in that language, and he's brought music, and I'm like, let's do this, let's explore this. So we have to give them, we have to normalize that difference and diversity is normal. That's the one thing that I have had to do in my studio. And I find that my students find themselves a lot more. They find it easier to learn how to sing and to express themselves when they are familiar with the method of expressing themselves. So that's the one thing I've started with. The drawback to that is that not when they step out, it's not always that way. So you do have to prepare them for their auditions. You do have to prepare them for what reactions might be if they bring some of this repertoire. But at the same time, they should be comfortable expressing this repertoire. And for me, I have always said, you know, we are on our own paths. This is not golden age opera where you do this, and then you become a star. This is 2021. You are on this path. You chart your own path, and it's okay to express what you need to express, but you have to be brave about it. So that's how I do it in my studio, and that's how my colleagues do it too. So
I think it's a great gift. I mean, the reality is what we all learn when we become what I would say a mature artist is that it is all about expressing what our voice is and what's important about what we believe, right? And so I think it's fantastic that you're giving that gift to young singers. So thank you for your work you're doing in that. Unfortunately, we could talk for another 3 hours and I would be completely enwrapped, but we try to keep our vlogs around an hour long. So I'm gonna start to draw us to a close. But first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to each of you for your voices, for your willingness to have this conversation, and your willingness to help us continue to grow as an art form, and for what you're doing outside of just this conversation in your own areas to do that. So thank you for that. Before we leave, I just want to go around, and I'm going to start with you, Victoria, but I would just love to know, if you could have one hope for how we continue in this movement forward in bringing diversity into this art form. If you could have one hope for how we continue to do that, what would that hope be for right now, where we would head in the future?
My one hope is that we continue this. This is not a one and done, that it is ongoing and continual, because we have a lot to unpack and to get done when you talk about systemic. So my one hope is this is not a one and done, it's continual.
Awesome. Charles, what are your thoughts on your hope?
It's kind of the same, that we realize that it's more of a relationship than it is a coffee meeting, that this needs to be something that we keep working on and developing, and normalizing that diversity is fine, and we have to appreciate different viewpoints. So that's my hope.
Awesome. Meg, how about you?
Well, this is not a hope, because I do believe that we are on a path that is not going to go back into the past. I just want to recognize all of the women composers, directors, conductors, all of the LGBTQ plus community, all of the BIPOC makers on stage, behind the scenes, and all of the diversity of people who have shown up in opera for many years. I want to recognize all of those people for the contributions that they've made, for the difficulties and challenges that they've faced and the successes that they have had. We just need more of it. and we are going to have more of it. It's wonderful to hear about young students who are able to live in their diversity as artists. And I know that as they come up into the professional world, it's going to change opera into something that is more inclusive and diverse than it ever had been before. So I guess rather than a hope, that's my excitement for the future.
I love it. I think that's even more hopeful to know that we're in the right direction, but we have a long way to go at the same time. So I have to do a couple of commercials really quick. First of those is that Loveland Opera Theater is a nonprofit organization, and we are able to continue to have these conversations and to continue to work and improve our art and the way that we have diversity in our art because we have patrons and supporters who help us to move forward as a company. And so if you would like to give a donation, the link for giving the donation is on the screen right now. You can also click on the link in the description box and help us out as we continue to have this conversation and do this work. I also want people to know that we're really excited. You know, we are very aware that we have ways to go as an art form and as a company to continue to bring more diversity in, but we're going to be presenting our very first opera composed by a woman this year. In October, we will be doing Pauline Viardot's Cinderella, and we're really, really excited about that. It's a small step forward, but it is a step forward as we continue to work on our diversity. And she wrote it when she was 83 years old, so really impressive work by a professional singer who became a composer after her singing career kind of started to wind down. So we're really excited about that, and we hope you'll check out more information about our upcoming production of Cinderella this October. Again, I want to say thank you to each of you so much. I value each of you as both people who are just great friends and colleagues, as well as people that really bring a lot to what we do in this area in the art form of opera. So thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do, and I hope we all continue to do it and thrive in your areas and continue to be great voices so that we can continue to learn from you. So thank you for your time.
Music.